Okay, so our final picture will end up looking something similar to this, but because I know if you are new to drawing, this can look pretty overwhelming to begin with. So what we've done is simplified the image and taken out a lot of the detail work that was created by the lines. So now all we have is this image right here in a larger grid. We're going to draw this image onto this larger grid, and the idea is to draw what you see in each square and just move from square to square. To me, I like to use the grid as a guide and not so much for perfection, because it's really just to help us to get our basic outline done, and then we can go in and put details in later. Now, if you're watching, there's still things that we need to keep in mind that we've learned from class, such as our sight lines and our just some basic drawing skills and tips that we'll go through as I start or continue to draw this silly snail right here. Okay, so one of the things I like to do is I like to look at the shapes that are created from the image that's on the grid and the actual grid. So I look at this shape right here, and the shape I see is mainly a triangle. So what I like to do is I try to mimic that shape, and I see that there's a little space between the top of this line and the edge of the grid. So I'm going to make sure to leave that space right there. Because even though we're drawing on a larger grid, everything should still line up on the grid exactly the same as it does on this smaller grid right here with the image. So again, I don't stress so much about the details of the snail. Instead, I'm just worrying about getting the outline of the drawing. So what I've done right here is this is a halfway mark between this point and this point. So here's my halfway mark, and I see that the outline of the snail's shell goes directly on top of that halfway mark. Now what we'll do when we get done with this drawing, we won't be completely done with our project because we'll still have this grid on here, and we don't want the grid to be seen. We want the image of the snail without the grid. So we'll go back and we'll either trace it using our light table in class, or we can use the transfer method, which I have shown in class, but also I will provide a link to a tutorial on YouTube for that. Again, this looks like it hits about halfway between this point and this point down here. Let me make sure that I'm on the right line. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that's about halfway. And I'm continuing to draw the outline of the snail. Another thing I talked about in class and is really important is getting the angles of your line correct. So to get the angle of your line correct, so for instance, if I were drawing this angle right here, this line and this angle, what I could do is I could line, I keep hitting the phone, there we go. I can line my pencil up with the angle, with the line that I'm trying to draw, and I can move it over. And even though I'm doing this with my left hand, which this is easier with a wooden pencil, like a number 2 pencil, rather than an actual mechanical pencil. So again, I check my angle, and it's right. If I had a little bit more lead, it'd be easier. So just like that, to make sure I'm getting the actual angle of the line correct. So now that I have the angle correct, I can go in and I can darken that line a bit. Typically you don't want to draw very dark with your lines on your grid because you want to be able to erase something if you mess up. But with this grid, you can actually mess up if you need to, because we're going to end up tracing our final image onto a different sheet of paper. So I'm going to continue. I see this as another triangle right here. Seeing the shapes is just as important as seeing what it is you're actually drawing. So right here, this gets pretty close to this grid line and pretty close to there. So I need to make sure to draw it exactly how I see it. We'll do another tutorial on how to do line work and putting in our details so that you can make it look more like this when we get done. But we're not there yet. If you're new to art, it can be kind of overwhelming in the beginning, but it's best to just break things down into small pieces, which is what we're doing. We're drawing what we see in each square rather than getting overwhelmed with the final image. So I'm going to continue with my outline of my drawing. I'm moving along pretty quick. I don't think this will take us more than 1 or 2 class periods to complete. The grid is really important for getting proportions correct. If you are drawing a portrait of someone, which means a picture of a person's face, then it would be very important for getting the eyes and the nose in the right place. But you might see some places where I'm just moving pretty quick and it may not look exactly like this image over here. Like maybe my curvy line wasn't as curvy, or maybe it doesn't hit exactly on the grid. Well, no one's going to be comparing your drawing to the actual image next to the grid. I say that because you still want to use the grid to help you get everything in the right place, but you don't end up needing to take a really long time. Again, here's another triangle, trying to get it exactly perfect. You need to allow yourself to have some freedom. And a lot of that freedom will come with the next step of the project, which is adding the line work like I've already discussed. So I'm going to check my angles here, get it right again. My lines are a little wobbly to begin with, but I end up going back and cleaning them up. If you notice me hitting my phone, I'm wearing a hat and it keeps hitting the edge of the phone. So here's a really good spot. It runs across the intersection of these grid lines right here. So I know that when I draw that, mine also needs to hit on the intersection of those grid lines. So I go up right here and it creates a little bitty triangle. And I've already started that line, so now all I have to do is connect it like that. It is important that you draw light so that if you mess up, we can go back and fix it up without having a lot of ghost lines there. Because if you draw really dark and then you try and erase them, the lines don't erase very well, and then you'll end up with those ghost lines right there. So, oh, here's another good triangle right here. And just look, if something looks, if I were to draw this further down and I looked back at this, I go, okay, I need to look at the spacing and get this spacing about the same over here on my actual drawing. Another thing I talked about in class is creating muscle memory. So if you trace your image a few times, I'm keeping my wrist in the same spot, but I'm just moving my hand to trace that oval right there. Obviously, when I move over here, it needs to be larger because it needs to cross over this line and it needs to get pretty close to this line right here. But because I've traced it a few times, you're more likely to get the shape and the angle correct than if you had just freehanded it from the beginning. And that's creating muscle memory. So let's see if there's somewhere else I can do that to show y'all how to. Maybe this line right here. So if I trace that over and over and over and over again to try and get, I'm creating almost like memory for my muscles in my hands and trying to recreate that line right here. So now that I've traced it a few times, if I move over here and try and keep it in the same angle, but also try and exaggerate a little bit because we're making a larger image over here, then you're more likely to get the curve of that line correct. So the only problem with it is you end up with a pretty thick line, and you should probably go back and thin it out a little bit. So one of the big things that kids will do wrong is they'll start moving a little bit too quick and they won't get things in the right square. So always go back and check to see if you're getting things in the right square. So like this eye right here, if you noticed, I counted 1, 2, 3, and then so 3 over, and then 2 down. So 1, 2. So I want to make sure I get the eye in the correct place. If I look, here's a sight line right here. A sight line is an imaginary line that is created when we are lining things up in the picture. So that line's not actually there. I can go back and erase it and show you. But I see this curve right here, this little point, this curve, and it lines up with this line, this curve right here. So that's where my curve in the eyeball should, that's where that line should start to curve. Okay, so then let's continue. We're getting there. I may not get all the details of my snail shell in there, but, and you can see another thing about sighting is you can see right here the width of these two lines, and the width right here is much larger. So sighting is noticing when things begin to change and also recreating that change in your own drawing. Just like that. So I can need to go back and connect that line. And I'm still trying to move quickly because I don't want to keep, I want to keep this video from ending up being like 20 minutes long. So things may not be perfectly correct, but you're still starting to see the snail being drawn. You can see the overall image coming together. Oh, I was starting to draw that there, but my sighting, I noticed that this wheel right here is so close to this line, so I was really getting that pretty off right there. So I'm going to draw it much closer to that line. Is there anything that this lines up with? Ooh, if I draw this line from the edge of the wheel and continue it up, it just happens to connect with the edge of the snail's mouth. So that means when I draw it, I can draw a line from the edge of the snail's mouth as long as it's in the right place, and I can bring it down, and now I have the edge of where my wheel should begin. That right there, that's called sighting, noticing where things line up. And you may say, well, what if nothing lines up? You'd be surprised how often patterns and relationships and comparisons just happen in a drawing just because the way that we draw them. Just patterns happen naturally. It's not something that, sometimes it's harder to look for, but sometimes they're pretty easy to look for. Another thing you can do, if you have one section that is just has a lot of information in that one square, what you can do sometimes is you can divide the square. Just remember to go back and erase your lines. You can divide the square into 4 parts. You can probably do like that, and it might help you. Basically, you're creating a smaller grid within a grid. I don't know if you can hear it, but my husband's music is very loud outside. And okay, here we go. So now we're starting to get things together. It's really important though, when you're starting out, kids can get so overwhelmed. They go, oh, I can't draw that snail. I can't draw those lines. Really see it as a collection of lines and shapes rather than seeing it as a complex drawing. And you have to start somewhere. Here's another triangle. So I'm going to continue with that. You have to start somewhere, and the more you practice, the better you will get. So I see this line right here, it gets really close to the eye. So I'm going to do like that. And then you can see this hits in this curve. This line right here hits in this curve. So that's where mine should hit as well. So I'm going to continue this. We're almost done right here. I'm going to let you just watch for a minute as I continue to draw. Muscle memory. Muscle memory right there, but I need to bring it down a little bit more. About to draw. Here we go. Oh my goodness. All right. Okay. So these little lines would be really good for muscle memory, because if you're not really sure how the curves work, tracing them a few times might help you. Just pay attention. Sometimes, and we may do an exercise in class where it's called hand-eye coordination. So as your eye, you should be looking over here, like I'm looking at where my finger is. And as my finger and eye are moving, I'm drawing at the same time, but I'm not actually looking at my drawing. It's pretty challenging, but the more you do it, I find that a lot of times I won't even be looking at my drawing. I'm looking more at what it is I am actually drawing. Like that. Here we go. And if you're working from home and you've already gotten this step correct and you're done with this step, you can go ahead and move on to step 2, which is transferring your drawing or tracing it. Okay, I think that I am done. I'm not really worrying about coloring in certain details right now because I can do that when I trace it onto my next step. It's really important though to make sure you have the basic outline complete and a few details complete. Now, siding, just some final siding things I'm looking at. This line looks off. I can see like this dips much further down, whereas mine is, if I get this angle, okay, so I line up my pencil with this angle right here, and I go over here, I go, okay, whoa, mine's a little off, so I need to go back, and maybe I could draw a line from the edge. Maybe something will line up with it. Okay, it lines up with this line right here, which I think I brought that too high too, but I think I just need to curve it more. Something about it looks a little off, but just recognizing how yours might look different than the actual drawing, the actual image you're working from. If you notice some differences, it means your eye's getting stronger and you're actually becoming better at sighting. Okay, so I think I am done, except maybe these lines right here. But again, you don't really need the lines for that. You don't need the grid lines for that because they're really just there to help us get our main drawing done.